I'm so glad to see all of you here and enjoying each other's company. So we have a wonderful speaker tonight. I think we have a board of director representative here, Lisa Riesler and her husband.
We have two.
No.
We have two.
We have two. Oh, yes, that's right. I'm sorry. David Allen.
David Allen.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm always doing that.
When's dinner, honey?
All right. And we have the former mayor,
Thank you.
Mr. Turner.
Oh, yeah, well, we're both here.
And both former mayors. Yep, there we go again. All right. And we have Delia Hawk, our representative for part of Siloam Springs, does a wonderful job. And so, have I missed anybody? And I will introduce you. You'll be introduced in a moment. All right. So, Helen, if you will please come and give the opening prayer.
Let's pray. Oh, great God in highest heaven, we praise you, love you. We just bless your holy name and our Savior, Jesus Christ. I pray that you will guide us as we listen. Give us wisdom, Lord, and help us to know the truth and act accordingly. We pray your blessing on Mr. Patterson as he speaks to us. And pray in Jesus' name.
All right, and then I'm going to ask Lisa Riesler if she will please come and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Someone asked me why we have a focus on local government tonight. And they said, with all the other things going on in the world and in our nation, why are we talking about local things? And so I want to remind all of us that the Republican women are interested in what's going on nationally, what's going on in the state, and what's going on locally. We are interested in government at every level. And actually, the local level is probably the most important because that's the one we can affect the most. We can see the people, we vote for them, we, participate in meetings. So the local is probably what we need to hear from more and be involved in. So I just wanted to remind us where our focus is. It's always on government, it's on elected officials, it's on issues, policy, and things like that. All right. I had some encouraging words. If you got my newsletter, then you read them already. But I just wanted to read them out loud because I think they're so powerful. This is from Psalm 119. I have a turn it over. Here we go. And remember your word to your servant, in which you have made me hope. This is my comfort in distress, that your promise gives me life. The arrogant utterly deride me, but I do not turn away from your law. When I think of your ordinances from of old, I take comfort, O Lord. Hot indignation seizes me because of the wicked, those who forsake your law. Your statutes have been my songs wherever I make my home. Though the cords of the wicked ensnare me, I do not forget your law. At midnight, I rise up to praise you because of your righteous ordinances. I am a companion of all who fear you, of those who keep your precepts. The earth, O Lord, is full of your steadfast love. Teach me your statutes. That's Psalm 119, 49 through 64. And so I'm now going to ask Christy Barnett if she would come up and introduce our speaker.
We welcome tonight Phillip Patterson, and he has been the City Administrator of Siloam for the past 5 years. He grew up in Benton, Arkansas. He graduated from Arkansas State University, and he received a master's degree from the University of Colorado. He was hired as Planning Director and became the Assistant City Manager in Lafayette, Colorado, before coming back home to Arkansas. He is very active in the Arkansas Municipal League and the International City Management Association. He is married, has 2 sons and 5 grandchildren, and he attends Landmark Baptist Church, and he is also an avid fly fisherman. And so tonight he's going to come to speak about the city utility bill and then some other things that go along with that. So come on up, we're happy to have you.
Thank you for having me here. It's been a while. I think I was invited in 2015 to speak right after I became the city administrator. Apparently that speech wasn't very well because I haven't been at the years. Didn't know. Haven't been invited back. I am an avid fly fisherman, and I really enjoy it. It's one of the passions in my life to be able to sort of let go of everything and just sort of get with Mother Nature. I tried golf many years ago, and I was really terrible at it. And so fly fishing is my exchange for trying to hit that little white ball around the world. Yes, Kathy's back there doing that. I was asked to speak on a number of issues, so I'm going to try to take them one by one, and you're welcome to ask me questions as we go along, and I'd maybe rather have an open dialogue back and forth than trying to just save all the questions till the end, if that makes sense. One of the first issues that you asked me to speak on is what different items are included on a city utility bill. So, the easy ones are obviously the electric bill, the water bill, the wastewater or sewer bill, and the garbage or trash bill, right? And then there's state, county, and local taxes on 3 of those, on the electric, the water, and the trash or garbage. The state of Arkansas exempts taxes on the wastewater or the sewer. I don't know why that is, but there's a specific exemption that doesn't require taxes to be collected on the sewer side. There are 3 other charges on your electric bill, and I'll start with the easiest one first, which is on your bill, on your utility bill, you'll see one that's called FSW. Federal Safe Water, I think is what it stands for. It's actually a state mandated fee. It was 30 cents, but in 2019, the legislature's upped it to 40 cents. So that's a dollar amount that is paid to the state. It goes to provide the state with money to do various things through the Natural Resources Commission at the state to help try to protect clean water issues in the state. There's also a sewer sludge fee that is on your bill. And every customer of the city pays a sewer sludge fee. For your average resident, it's about 1.1 cents per 1,000 gallons of water. So as you use more water, that fee goes up. It's not built into the base cost because the fee gets greater and greater as you use more water. And the big issue for the sewer sludge fee is the manufacturing plants historically create a lot of sludge. And so that fee gets larger when you create that greater amount of sludge. And the sludge is the byproduct of the wastewater treatment process. So we clean, filter the water, we release it back into Flint Creek, but those biosolids that we take out of that, we end up drying, and then we have to truck that to the landfill. And that's what that sewer sludge fee is covering. And like I said, the dollar amount gets greater, I believe, based on the amount of water you use, or at least in the different classes of customers. So that's why it's not built in. The one that's the hardest one to explain, and I really worked at trying to make this as simple as possible, is what's called a power cost adjustment, a PCA fee that's on your bill. It's part of your electric bill, and it's part of the cost that we get from GRDA, the Grand River Dam Authority, where we buy our wholesale electricity from. So within the rate structure that you pay for your kilowatt hour, there is a cost for energy. And as that energy cost goes up or goes down, that power cost adjustment fee is adjusted accordingly. So within that wholesale cost, when GRDA buys coal or wind or whatever they're using, natural gas, to create the electricity that they transfer to us, as that price fluctuates, that PCA has got to fluctuate also. So built into our rates is a PCA of 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour. Or it might be I think it's 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour. So if that PCA goes above that, you'll see a bill, you'll see a charge, because you're going to be billed for that additional wholesale power cost. If the PCA, which changes monthly, if the PCA is less than that 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour, you'll see a credit on your bill. So if you have copies of your bill and you go back and look at bills beginning in 2020, you'll see January, February, March, all the way through June, you'll see a credit on your bill for that PCA charge because the cost of power was less. Now, we can get into the question about February and the winter storm and all that crazy stuff, which they weren't billing us for until just recently. But starting in July and August and September, that power cost adjustment has creeped up above the 2.3 cents, and you'll see that you're paying a proportional share. So I went back and looked at my bills just so I could have an example, but in my bill from February, my personal bill, I had a credit on the power cost adjustment of $3.62. My electric bill was $90. So it was, almost 3%, just less than, greater than 3%. Now, as I get to July, I had to pay $1.10, and my electric bill was $1.41. So the power cost adjustment was going up. It was greater than that 2.3% or 2.3 cents. And as I got to my September bill, my electric bill went up a little bit, and so did my power cost adjustment of $2.03. So again, that cost fluctuates. We get information from the Grand River Dam Authority monthly saying that their board has set a PCA of X, and then our staff in the billing department runs everybody's bill through a calculation to account for that portion that's already built into the electric rate per kilowatt hour. And then you, again, either get a credit if it's less than 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour, or you get an additional charge if it's greater than that 2.3. So it's a pass-through based on that cost of energy, all right? The other question that I was asked to talk about was to discuss the transfers between the utility fund and the general fund, and that's always a fun one to discuss, right? So there are two funds, there's more than that, but there are two basic funds in the city, and really there are three, so I'll throw it out there just so you'll know about it. But we have the general fund, which really covers police, fire, parks, planning, building, library, courts, those type general activities. And then we have the utility fund, which is where all the rates go back into. So water, sewer, electric, and solid waste. And then we also have a street fund, which is separate from all those. So going back and looking as far back as I could look, since I got here in 2015 and long before that, the city has always appeared to have transferred transferred some money out of the utility fund to help cover the cost of the general fund. And I've gone back to 2010. I've been told it goes back way beyond that, but there's always some of that transfer. Now, some of that transfer covers the normal operating cost that the general fund does for the utilities. So we have a city attorney, he provides legal services to those utilities. We have a finance department, they provide accounting services for those utilities. We have an HR department, human resources, they provide HR services for those utilities. My office is the administration for the city. We have to have an administration for those utilities. So some of that money that's transferred covers that. But some of it also covers some of those operating costs in the library, in police, in fire, in parks. And that's part of that transfer. So and I'm just looking at my notes because I want to make sure I hit all the right points. I went back and looked starting in 2010 and started looking at the amount of transfers that were coming out of the total utility fund. So in 2013, the city transferred 57% of the revenue coming from the utility fund over into the general fund. In 2014 and 2016, they transferred 40%, and in 2012, they transferred 39% of the total utility fund revenue. And in those years, those transfers covered anywhere from 48% to 72% of the general fund. So the general fund is funded typically by taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, and fees. And so the idea that if your general fund isn't covering all your expenses, where does that money, and that money was being transferred from the utility fund. In 2019, I asked the board to consider adopting fiscal policies. And part of those fiscal policies was to limit the amount of the transfer. To say only so much from those individual utilities can be transferred to the general fund. Because going back and looking at that historical amount, it was like, well, what happened in that year when we transferred 57%, 2013? What was going on? And, there was some big project, and the city didn't have the revenues from the general fund, so it was like, well, we'll just take it out of the utility fund. So part of that issue of saying, one, the general fund needs to sort of learn to tighten its belt a little bit and live on its own. And we can't do it overnight, but let's put a ceiling, let's put a governor or a ceiling on the amount of that transfer. And part of the reason for that too is when I got here in 2015 and I started looking at the rates in the utility funds and what the city was charging, well, how do we know what to charge? And if we don't know how much is going to be transferred to the general fund, how do we know how much the utilities really need to operate on? And I equated it to running a business, running a franchise. And so running a franchise like McDonald's, you pay a franchise fee. So if you don't know every year from year to year how much you're going to have to pay for the franchise fee, how do you know what to charge for the hamburgers, right? You need to understand that, I got to do a budget in the utility side of things. So those two issues really drove the idea of talking to the board about adopting some fiscal policies to limit that amount of transfer. And the board did it, and so since that time, the transfers have lowered. There's still transfers, but since 2019, the average amount of transfers from the utility fund have been about 33%, and it represents about 40% on the general fund side. Now, back in 2019, I told the board, when you do this, you may have to consider raising fees in the general fund over time because that's where that money should come from rather than the utility transfer. So if you look at numbers and you want to say, what does that money go to? And as I said earlier, today, it helps cover some of the expenses in police, fire, library, courts. Well, what kind of dollars are we talking about? 40% of the 2020 police budget would have been $1.7 million. Their budget was $4.1 million. In the fire department, 40% was 2.3. In parks was 674,000. In the courts, 169,000, and 235,000 in the library. So some of that money is going to cover those expenses that aren't covered by the general fund. We talked about utility rates, and I want to talk about it just for a second. In 2013, the city board adopted a standard utility rate increase that increased annually every year. And so for the electric, it was based on CPI. For water, wastewater, and sanitation, it was CPI plus 1%, Consumer Pricing Index plus 1%. So those rates have crept up annually, year to year. I can't speak to why the board did that, but I suspect it was so that at some point, 5, 6 years down the road, there wasn't a utility study, and all of a sudden we had to have a huge jump in utility rates, right? You'd rather creep them up a little each year rather than to go 5 years and then, oh, we got to raise it by 6, 7, 10%. I mean, other cities have been known to do that. You see some of it happening in some cities down south of us in years past. So part of that rate study that we wanted to do, and we just finished it not long ago, the board agreed to do the rate study, but part of that was to see, is that rate increase that happens annually needed? Is that the right amount? Does it need to be more? Does it need to be less? Could it be less? So the rate study actually showed that in 3 of the 4 utilities, that annual increase could be less than what is currently set by code. So by the statute, by the city statute, that CPI index has to increase, the electric has to increase by CPI every year, water, wastewater, and sanitation by CPI plus 1%. So in the rate study, and we'll take this to the board later this year and ask them to make adjustments to that, but in the rate study, it says that we could reduce the electric increase annually by half. So half of CPI. And then on the water side, it was, we could decrease the water rate, which was CPI plus 1%, by 70% of that total. Decrease the wastewater by 20% of the original rather than 50% on the water. But the sanitation side needed to increase for the sanitation to be able to be run like a business. Now you think of that, you say, okay, great. You're decreasing 50%, decreasing the water by 70%, decreasing the wastewater by 20%. Oh, you're going to raise sanitation. Well, if you look at my bill, and I suspect if you look at your bill, which one is the least amount that you spend on your utility bill? It's the sanitation. So decreasing the first 3 and increasing the last one from your normal, standard, average residential bill, you should see an overall reduction compared to what it is based in code today, if that makes sense. So in the rate study, yes sir, I'll be right with you. In the rate study, we had to use a CPI. We had to use a number for CPI, and we used 1.5%, which historically has been a good number for CPI the last 3 to 5 years. So under that CPI 1.5%, well, then the electric would drop to 0.75%. Wastewater would drop by a great, or water would drop by a much larger percent. But you get to the sanitation side, and it was CPI plus 1%, but really that needs to be up to about 4% a year to catch up, because it's behind the 8 ball. It's not covering its expenses, right? But if we base that 1.5% CPI raise based on the current code, and we look at an average utility bill for residents, and the board adopts these changes, it would save a resident going into 2022 about $1.50 a month. So it's not a huge savings, but it lowers the amount of that annual increase. And the beauty of that rate study said we're able to do that. We don't need that large of an annual increase in the rates that's in code. Now, state legislature adopted a requirement for water providers that we now have to do a rate study every 5 years. So we looked at a 5-year window, and in 5 years, we would propose that the city board do another rate study, not just on water, but on the electric, on the water, and the wastewater, because if we're gonna do one, we might as well study them all. Sir, you had a,
I need to make sure, really easy to get lost in this. You gotta break, you do all the different things.
I'm lost, I don't know.
Make sure that when you talk about decrease, you're talking about the decrease in the amount we increase each year.
Yes.
Not overall utility.
Yes. So, again, if we're using CPI as 1.5%, so 1.5% is what the electric bill would increase in 2022 based on the current code. 1.5% plus an additional 1% is what water and wastewater and sanitation would increase based on the current code. The rate study says that we can reduce that increase on the electric by 50%, reduce it by 70% total on the water, 20% on wastewater, but increase it by 4% on sanitation, rather than 2.5 would go to 4. Now, that's all great, fine, and dandy. The problem is today CPI is not 1.5%. Inflation is occurring, prices are going up, inflation is running 5 to 6%. So, you know, under the current code, if nothing's done, come 2022, you would see a 5 to 6% increase in your electric bill, 5 to 6% increase plus 1% in your water, wastewater, and sanitation. We will propose to the board later this year to adopt these changes for the next 5 years going forward so that that rate increase isn't there, so that it's following that rate study. And I know, I appreciate, John, what you said. It's a very difficult thing to explain, and I've had it explained to me until I regurgitate it back to my staff, and they say, no, you still don't understand. And I think I finally got it, and it's taken me 5, 6 years to get there. But it's again, in 2013, I think the board did the right thing to try to create an incremental increase in cost because things go up. But it's the question of trying to say, is that really needed today? And when we went to the board and asked the board to adopt a rate study or to fund a rate study and enter into an agreement, you know, there were residents who came and had concerns that we were going to raise the rates. And it's a legitimate concern, but we don't know that until we study it. And even if we studied it and said we needed to raise rates, I'm not sure that I would recommend we do it, depending on what the studies showed and how it showed we should raise it, because, you know, the economy is in a difficult time at this point. I mean, we're seeing the consumer pricing index going up, you know, cost of meat, cost of bread and milk, everything's going up. So, you know, but we had to study it to be able to say, is it doing the right thing? Is it keeping those utilities where they need to be? Do we need to raise it? Do we need to lower it? And I was pleased when the consultants came back and said, you don't need the raise that's built into the code. The annual raise, you can lower that dollar amount or that percentage. So I felt that, at least from my perspective as the administrator, that money was well spent to show us that we could lower that amount of money over time. I wish, thinking back, I wished I would have looked at the numbers, and I may have them. I'll look a little later in my stack of papers here. In that report, it showed us at the end of 5 years what that savings might be to your average homeowner. And that average homeowner's bill was running about $190 a month for electric, water, sewer, gas, electric, water, sewer, and sanitation. So you can compare that to your own personal bill on an average.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, going back to all these years that there was the transfers out of the utilities to the general fund, are you saying that most likely during those years, 2013, when there was large transfers, that too much was being collected for utilities, so they were just using it in other areas? I mean,
Well, in 2013 is when the rates started. So I didn't go back and see what drove that large transfer. I assumed there was some big project that the city was wanting to do and needed some additional funding to do that in the general fund. But I just went back and looked at.
But is there like a big slush fund in utilities? I mean,
don't
that's
think
a
it's-
lot of
I don't
money
think
to
it's a slush fund. I
transfer.
think the issue, let me go to the next question and try to answer it, and then we
Okay.
can come back to that, because it might help to some degree. It's not I would never say it's a slush fund. Cities that have their own electrical departments typically are gonna transfer some money from the electric to the general fund, right? And the question that you had asked me to speak on is, how do cities fund these items if they don't own their own utilities? So what typically happens, if you don't own your own utility, either you're not gonna have the service, or you may have a lower level of service, or you may have all of those plus higher sales tax. So there's probably 50 cities in the state of Arkansas that have a higher sales tax than ours. We have a 2-cent sales tax. 1 cent of that is permanent. The other 1 cent is, 3/8 of the other 1 cent is going to capital projects for utilities and quality of life, and that will expire in 2016. And the other 5/8 of that 1 cent goes to pay off the $31 million bond for the improvements to the water treatment plant. So if those go away, then the city only really has a 1 cent sales tax. And there are other cities that are smaller and larger than us that have up to 3-cent sales tax in the state of Arkansas. So if the city didn't have maybe the ability to transfer some money from the utilities to cover some of those costs in the utility fund, in the general fund, then what you might see is we might not have the library operation that we have. We might not have code enforcement. We might not have that level. We might have lower levels of service in police and fire, because all of that helps to cover some of that cost. Or the city might say, voters, we need a higher sales tax rate to cover some of that gap. So that's how typically cities do that. So it's either, again, through lowering the level of service, not having as great a parks as we do, or not having the service, or having higher sales tax. Does that hopefully answer that?
I do have a question.
Yes?
And I'm not quite sure how to say it, but on the electric water bill, utility bill, there is a set amount. Everybody pays $13 and some cents, flat fee. So what does that go for? If the rates cover all of the expenses of the electric, water, sewer, trash departments and all of their needs, plus a little bit extra for the general fund, then what is that $13 paying for? And why is it there?
Typically, there is a base fee. So you have a minimum fee no matter how much water or electricity that you use, because you're tied into the system and you have to pay for some of that. We have to recoup some of that cost of that utility that is the infrastructure that's in the ground or in the airs to do that. So I don't see that fee on my bill, but you may see it on your bill only because you have a different, you have solar.
The $13 fee is for all residents. I read about it. And then there's a $14 fee for people outside of the city of Siloam that use the utilities. So it's a flat fee that everybody pays. It has nothing to do with how much you use, how you get it,
Right.
anything like that.
So typically there is a base charge. If
But it
you're,
has nothing to do with the rates.
it had nothing to do with the rate. So no matter how much you use, there is a base charge. On my bill, I don't see it, so it must be built into the standard electrical. My bill just shows, that I had $90 for electric, so much for water, so much for sewer, so much for this. I don't see the base adjustment charge on my bill.
This was, it might be older, they may not be putting it on the bill anymore, but in 2012, it was in the little booklet that explained all the fees, and it was on my bill.
I will be happy to go back and research that, but I don't think that fee is still being charged, or it's wrapped into the overall fee. It may be, and it may be mean, I have 3 copies of my bill. I've never seen a base, but I've lived in cities that have a water provider that says you're going to pay $15 whether you use a drop of water or not, and then you start paying, for a rate. And the same thing on some electric bills I've had, where there's a set fee no matter how much electricity I use, and it's just a user fee that says every month that you're tied to the system, regardless of how much you use, there's a certain amount that has to be recouped to be tied to that system to cover the infrastructure maintenance cost, and that's usually what that is. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
If I heard you correctly, did you say 1 year that you took about 57% of the funds out of electric to go to the general fund?
In 2012, I think it was. In 2013, the city transferred about 57%. In 2014 and 16, 40%, and in 2012, 39%.
Oh, okay, so does that mean that the electric company or the electric is operating short of funds, or?
They were. I can't speak to the years before I got here,
No,
based
but I
on
mean the years
based
you've
on based on just my quick going back and looking at that. But I doubt that they were operating in a shortfall. They may not have put any money into reserves during those years. The city may have transferred, that when you run a business, in any business, you want to have some reserves every year. You want to pay all your debt, right? And put some money back for the lean years. And so we try to do that every year with the city budget. Those years they may not have done that. They may have said all of the money that might normally go into a reserve is going to be transferred over to the general fund. But
what I've been hearing is every year, the city's been taking out of the electric fund, going to the general fund. So does that mean that we're charging too much for electric and not enough for other services?
well, let me back up for a second and clarify one thing. I didn't break it down. I looked at the total utility fund. So out of all of the revenue that's generated by the electric, the water, the sewer, and the wastewater, that 57% or that 40% is from that total revenue. Okay,
Not just from.
Now, the electric fund probably generates the majority of that, but I didn't break it down by the individual funds, okay? And so those funds aren't operating in a negative other than the solid waste or sanitation fund. If we don't raise that increase to 4%, it's not operating in a negative fund today, but over the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to get really close to operating in a negative fund, right? So the idea was to say within those fiscal policies, there is this limit in the amount the city can transfer from those utility funds over to the general fund, so that, no offense to my board members are here, that or past board members, that there could be some big project come along and the city just say, oh, well, we want to do this, but where do we get the revenue? Well, let's just go grab some more money from that fund and move it over here. So that was the intent of trying to create those governors to say, you've got to limit the amount of those transfers. And we need to tighten the belts where we can tighten the belts. We need to grow the economy in the general fund to make up those shortfalls any further than what that transfer is. We talked about, back to your question about sort of what the cities do or how does that happen. Part of that issue too is ISO ratings. So the ISO rating is the insurance rating for fire insurance, property insurance. We're trying to get better. We're trying to get to a 2. We're currently a 3. But a lot of cities our size would be a 4 or less, or higher, 5, because their fire service isn't as quality a service as ours. Bella Vista has a 4. So if you have a house in Bella Vista, and you have the same insurance and generally the same price house, you're going to be paying more for property insurance in Bella Vista than you are in Siloam Springs. And we're just this close to getting I think a 2 ISO rating, which will save all of us on property insurance rates, right? Because some of that money is offsetting the funds that are going to the fire department. And I'll talk about some more funds that are going to the fire department in a minute. The last two topics I wanted to talk on, to give you an idea of other cities that have greater sales tax. I just grabbed a handful of them. Brinkley, Bryant, Calico Rock, Dumas, Greenland, Eureka Springs, Lincoln, Prairie Grove, they have sales tax, and I don't know if they're permanent or not because the state doesn't list them that way, but they have sales tax ranging from 2.375 to 3%. So that's one way. If there wasn't a transfer and the city decided to make up that gap, they would have to go to you as voters and ask the voters to increase that sales tax, right? So that's sort of the trade-off. The question that was put for me, the last question was, what would happen if to the city budget if voters required reduction in utility rates? Well, I want to be very clear that utility rates don't go to a vote. The utility rates are set by the board of directors, so they don't go to a vote of the people. Sales tax and taxes typically go to a vote of the people, but utility rates are set by the board. So the way you impact that is, with your vote on board members, I guess, but generally, unless the board decided to put the rates out there, it's not required by law to be set by voters. And the idea is to run it, like I said earlier, to do your best to run it as a business, and that's why generally it's not set that way. I want to talk for just a minute about the 2-cent sales tax. The 1 cent that's permanent in 2013, prior to 2013, was split. 80% going to streets and 20% going to the general fund. In 2013, as residents, you voted to change that split for 10 years. 40% streets, 20% police, 20% fire, and 20% general fund. And the police and fire have been holding that money to cover capital costs. So we've spent money on new fire trucks, we spent money on new police vehicles, we spent money on PPEs, personal protection equipment for police and fire. Fire department built a fire training tower. The police department funded a new emergency communication system that allows us to communicate in Little Rock. It allows us to communicate with Bentonville. Historically, when the police would take a suspect and they would arrest somebody and they took them to Bentonville jail, Benton County Jail, there were areas, I think between Gentry and Haifa, thank you, that we lost communication. And the police officers would have to say, I'm entering the dead zone. I'm through the dead zone. And if something happened, there was no communication. So this was a multi-million-dollar project, but that's what that money has gone for. In 2023, in October 2023, that split is going to end. And it's going to go back to 80% streets and 20% general fund. Now, we've had some discussions at the board level about what we're going to do. Are they going to ask you to extend that split, to let it all go back to streets? It's a pretty large dollar amount. Today, the 2021 budget had $850,000 for that 20% going to police and $850,000 for the fire department going to the fire department and police. From that, 20% of that 1 cent sales tax. So one of the things that I think is very interesting in my line of work is to watch the base in general fund grow. Now, we haven't been successful at bringing in new retailers, but we've replaced some retailers that have left. Burke's is the new replacement out there in Signature Plaza. We've replaced some restaurants, we've added some new restaurants, but all those increase the sales tax. And so if we're successful in continuing to do that, then the opportunity exists that maybe then there's some success that we can have on the other side of that coin with the utility rates. But I think it's a balancing act between sales tax dollars and general fund revenue and utility fund rates. questions? Yes, sir?
Did cities get any COVID relief money?
The city got some COVID relief money. Specifically, we got some reimbursement in the first round in the CARES Act. I honestly don't remember, it wasn't a significant amount. In the latest, the American Rescue Plan Act, the city is scheduled to receive $3.5 million. We already got half of it, 1.75, I believe. We've asked the board, we had a workshop with the board, and we suggested that they use that money to, there's about a half a dozen things theoretically that you can use that money on related to COVID in somehow, some way. One of those is broadband internet access. But the feds have still said, here's the final interim rules, which means they're not final, and everything I can read still says that that money is to help expand broadband where fast internet is not available. And fast internet is defined as 25 megabytes download and 3 megabytes upload, which we have. So we're not there. The reality is fast internet in my world is 100 megabytes up and down at a minimum. So we had a workshop with the board and suggested that we use that money to pay EMT salaries, because we can do that, save that money and put it in a pot over here. And we're currently, by the end of this month, I will have responses from the RFP that we put out, the request for proposal for a feasibility study for a municipal broadband. And so if the city decides to get into the broadband business, we as staff have suggested the board hold that $3.5 million to use that as a way to fund that start of that program. Broadband, in my opinion, is an economic development issue. If the city is going to stay current and be able to, Siloam Springs historically has had manufacturing jobs, right? We take raw product, we put it into something, and we ship it out. It's great, it's primary jobs, money comes into the economy. Maybe manufacturing is going to come back to the United States at some point. But more than likely, if it does, that manufacturing isn't going to be you and I sitting in an assembly line. It's going to be a bunch of high-tech robots and computers doing things. And in order to be able to attract those jobs in those businesses, I think the city and I think the board agrees with me that we need to be looking at making sure we're prepared for that with high-speed internet. So I don't know where we're going to end up. The board's going to have to make the final decision at some point. We've asked the consultants, whoever gets this contract to do this feasibility study, to look at 2 or 3 different business models. Does the city go into it and operate it as its own utility? There are some pluses and minuses with that. Do we partner with one entity and do this public-private partnership? Or does the city string up the fiber everywhere, and do we open it up? It's called an open access network, and let anybody and everybody join in, and you now have 3 or 4 different vendors you can choose from. I think there's pros and cons on each one, and the question is, what's the right model for the city of Siloam Springs? I think we operate a wonderful, great electric department, and I know people that are on Carroll Electric, and they want to be on City Electric because city gets their power back on very quickly, and they're still, they're the last ones. Hope nobody has Carroll Electric here. Yeah, sorry, you do, yes, of course.
I got a generator.
Excuse me, you got a generator, yes.
Generator, yeah.
Good for you. So I think that there's an opportunity that the city could operate a very successful municipal broadband, but there are concerns about that, and how do we get into it, and what is that cost versus what is the cost, and the pros and cons of all of those. So that's part of this feasibility study. The responses are due, I think the 30th. I'm looking at Lisa, she's on that committee. She's looking at me, but I think they're due the 30th, so probably sometime late October, I would say we're probably going to go to the board with a proposal, hopefully, to say we want to hire this consultant and let them spend the next 3 to 4 months really diving into this situation here. Clarksville, Hope, Arkansas are the latest ones to get into municipal broadband, but they didn't necessarily have anybody knocking on their door to partner with. You know, we have Cox, and Cox is good and bad. It costs a lot. You're shaking your head no.
It's high.
I won't, it's expensive. Ozark Go is out there. They would love to be here. Bolt is right over in Oklahoma. They would love to be here. So we have a different situation in Clarksville or Hope. So there might be a different way to do it. But I'm not the one that'll make those decisions. The consultant will give us some input. We'll take it to the board, and the board will end up being the ones to make the call of how to proceed. But the idea, at least, is, you know, back to my earlier comment, it's an economic development tool, in my opinion. We've got to be ready. I mean, we're in the, 21st century, and we've got to be ready for the 22nd century, and things are moving too fast. I mean, I love when I used to think about my grandparents, the changes they saw in this world, you know, from horse-drawn buggies to vehicles, right? And you think about what we've seen. I mean, I can remember the first computer I ever operated on that was portable. It was the size of a suitcase. And I carried it around going from house to house doing these residential energy audits. And today, your Apple Watch has more power than some of the computers that sent people to the moon, right? What are your grandkids going to do? What kind of technology are they going to have? And we've got to get prepared for it and try to move forward. So that's, I think I commend the board on trying to go back into the issue and look at broadband, because I think it's very, very important. The last thing I want to say, back to sales tax base and expansion of retail, we've been trying, since I got here, to really expand the retail base. And Siloam Springs is unique. It's a standalone city, which I think is very, very important. It's not part of the corridor, what I call the corridor, Fayetteville to Bentonville. No offense over there, but hardly today you know, unless you, I know, and I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Central Arkansas, but you generally don't know officially when you left Fayetteville and when you enter Bentonville, right? I mean, Springdale and Rogers are in between there. There's some gaps there. But in a few more years, it's going to be one huge megalopolis. Siloam Springs has this unique opportunity because it's a standalone city. Part of the problem is it's a standalone city 20 miles west of that corridor where all the growth theoretically is happening. Growth is coming here, and it's here. I've been saying it since I got here, is we may not be on the radar today, but we're going to be on the development's radar. We're seeing more housing projects come in. There's good and bad with that. Good news with that, in my opinion, is commercial follows rooftops. And as the city builds more rooftops, the ability to get commercial retailers here that aren't here today continues to get a little better and a little better and a little better. And what that means is when I look at retail, when I look at buying power within the city of Siloam Springs, average household income is 40, 50, 45,000, whatever it is, and you look at 6,000 households, how much buying power do they have? There's so much money there. How much is the sales tax coming in? Only a portion of that. So where's the rest of that sales tax going? It's going over to the corridor. We have sales tax leakage. I can't buy this shirt in Siloam Springs. I have to go to the corridor to buy my shirt and my pants. So if we can get the retailers to come here, and we can get the developers to invest and get those retailers in, we can reduce that leakage, and that sales tax will increase, and then maybe we can go back to the board and say, hey, you know that limit on the utility transfer? Maybe we can reduce it again. Maybe we can reduce it again. But that's the goal. That's my goal, at least. I got 2 board members here. I've never had this discussion with them. But the idea is reduce that sales tax leakage, because we don't need to be giving our money to Springdale. We need to be spending the tax dollars here. Yes, sir.
How much of the percentage, since we're on state line road, of the tax dollars come from Oklahoma?
It's a hard number to pin down, but the best estimate is that 40% of our workforce comes out of Oklahoma. So I equate that to about 40% of our sales taxes created by Oklahoma. Now, I'm going to be asking the board in the budget to make some minor changes to some programs that we have. And one of the programs that I want to be able to get next year is to buy real-time cell phone data. So 1984, George Orwell, Big Brother's watching you. Well, that's your cell phone today. Your cell phone knows when you go to Walmart, because when you get home it says, hey, how was your trip to Walmart? So you can buy that data, and you can see, I can say, I want to know at Walmart for 24 hours where the cell phones came from. And it'll show that there were so many trips made to Walmart in that 24 hours, and it'll say, 10 came from Tahlequah, 5 came from Sulphur Springs, 10 came from Fayetteville, or 100 came from Fayetteville, which kind of blows my mind when I looked at it one time. Must be some relatives living here and doing it,
Yeah.
So you're looking for those repeat trips, not the one-time trips. But it'll tell you that. So you can look at a week and say, oh, well, 20% of the trips to our Walmart store came from Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and from, Grove and wherever else. So it'll give us a little bit cleaner way to look at that percentage and kind of nail it down. But the best guess today is about 40%. And I don't have you asked me to prove it. I really don't. I've been told that 40% of the workforce is from Oklahoma. That's from the chamber. So I just turn it around. My wife gets mad at me because when I go to Walmart, I park at the end of the rows as far away from, and as we walk down the row, I'm like, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, 1, 2, and that's the way I sort of try to figure that out. You had another question?
Well, how much do you think of the casino brings to Siloam? Or if any?
I don't know that it brings, I think it brings more problems.
Does it?
Probably drains more people's pockets.
It drains people's pockets, it creates some other social problems, in my opinion. I will tell you a short story. I got here in 2015. John Mark was the mayor. He said, hey, you ever go to the casino? Not really, I'm not a big gambler. Well, if you ever go over there, we sell them water. Flush all the commodes. I did. The guy in the bathroom was looking at me going, what in the world? I said, hey, I'm just checking the commodes out. I had to go back to the mayor and say, I did what you told me. I flushed all the commodes. Thank you. I'll stick around if you have any other questions. I'll be here. I appreciate the invite. I hope I explained the utility bill and the transfers and gave you a little insight in that. I'm at City Hall almost every day. If you have questions, my email address is ppatterson@Siloam Springs. I'm there. You're welcome to email me, call me. I'll be happy to try to answer any other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And he is definitely accessible and available and willing to talk, so thankful for that. And thank you for that excellent explanation. So, just a short announcement, we are having a silent auction in the back on about 3 tables. We have lots of food. We would love for you to linger and make some bids on the items that are there. We're trying to raise money for our speaker in October, who's coming from Ireland. This is not the only place he's coming to. He's going to many other places, but he's writing a book and interviewing a lot of people about the United States, about America, about who we are. And he's going to talk to us about American exceptionalism. And you have the handouts around on the sheets.
Oh, okay, good.
On the seats.
Okay.
So there's sheets on the seats. Yeah. So,
Make sure to take
yes. So,
hand them out.
yes. So that ends our program part of the meeting. Guests are welcome to stay for the next part, which is a very short business meeting. But if you would like to leave or you'd like to go shop or eat, that would be fine. You don't have to sit in your seats anymore. Yes, do you?
Just one announcement too on the 40 days supply.
Yes.
Starts on Wednesday, and if you want to sign up for this spray, we had about 300 people yesterday at the pro-life rally in Rogers, and just supporting life. So, but they're beginning on Wednesday, praying and praying over at where the new, will be a new Loving Choices pregnancy
sorry to hear that. Thank you for bringing that up, yeah. 40 days of prayer. Are there going to be any other places where folks are gonna gather for prayer that you know
I
of?
mean, you can pray on your own, but
Sure.
they're gonna pray from 7 in the morning to 7 PM, 7 days a week for 40 days. So if you'd
Okay.
like to go over and, if you'd like to sign up and go over and pray, that's great.
And what is the address again?
I'll have to send you the address, but it's right behind the St. Mary's, the old St. Mary's Hospital.
Oh, in Rogers.
In Rogers.
Okay,
Yes.
yes, yeah. That's on Highway, old Highway
So
71, isn't it?
13,
And probably 13th
In Walton.
Street.
What is it, Rogers?
Mhm.
Walnut, what is it, Walnut?
Walnut, yeah, Walnut.
Walnut at 13th Street.
Rogers, Walton.
Walnut and 13. Okay, all right.
Hey, Catherine.
Good. Yes, sir.
Talking about prayer meeting, I wanted to make everybody aware, a week ago, Saturday, on 9/11, this young lady celebrated, or helped bring together everyone in the City Hall parking lot for a community-wide prayer to pray for our nation and pray for our community and pray for everyone, just because of it being a special day and the 20th anniversary. And there was probably 70-something people. Yeah, for its first year, it was a nice thing, and Lisa made T-shirts, and I wanted to recognize her because it was a nice thing.
Yeah, very nice.
Thank you so much.
And this is first of many, right?
Yes. No, yes,
Yes.
that's good. And I think I read somewhere where President Trump was calling on prayer for the nation for how many days? Does anyone remember? Sorry, I don't have that with me. But, yeah, it's going on right now, so. Yeah, the presidential prayer team has some of that up, I believe, if you're a member of that. Yeah. So, are there any other announcements before we go to the business meeting? We have a very short business meeting. We have no minutes because we had the joint meeting in August, so we didn't have any minutes from that meeting. So that's great, and the treasurer is out of town, so we don't have a treasurer's report. So, isn't that great? I don't think it's changed much anyway. Okay, old business. I am working on a mock directory, membership directory, and I just want you to consider, we would really like for it to be something that promotes community among us. So we would love to put in names and some contact information, maybe a phone number or an email address, something like that. Not a street address necessarily, but some way people could contact each other. So please be thinking about that, because we'll be contacting you to see if that would be all right to put in there. All right, how many of you have been to the YouTube channel? I'm just curious to see our videos. 3? 3 people? Well, maybe the others aren't here that are watching. So I want to thank Camden again, our videographer, for his patience in filming all of this. The other thing we wanted to do, and I don't know that we really have enough to do, but we need to elect officers for next year. And so we were going to take nominations from the floor, and we may want to do it by email rather than voting, but we need all the offices filled. So we need president, first vice president, secretary, treasurer, chaplain, maybe is appointed.
They're appointed.
Yeah, so just those. So don't leave just because we're going to be electing officers, okay? All right. Okay. Yeah. So, do I have any nominations from the floor for president?
I nominate Carolyn Gear.
Do I have any other nominations, please?
I second that motion. Okay.
Okay, well, there's one on the slate. Is there anyone else who's just dying to get up here and talk and lead us? All right, it's been moved and seconded, and all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, first vice president. Do I have any nominations for first vice president? Anyone like to? The first vice president gets our speakers, our programs, primarily. Does a lot of other things, but that's the main thing. So who would like to do that? Who knows people?
Oh, I was gonna nominate you, Kathy.
Kathy, yeah.
That'd be good.
How about
You
now?
know so many people.
No. No. Mhm.
I could help.
If, is somebody back there wanting to do it? I couldn't hear.
Someone was trying to be kind of encouraged to do it. What do you say, Kathy? Were you nominating Kathy? No, oh, you were nominating
Christie.
Christie.
I wanna nominate.
And I'll second it.
I second Chrissy's motion to nominate Kathy.
Ah, okay.
So
There you go.
we have a motion and we have a nomination and a second for Kathy Turner. What did you
Yeah,
say?
she travels.
You travel
She's
too
got her
much.
camper.
You're-
She's gotta travel.
I'm gonna nominate
All right.
Christie again.
Okay, we have a nomination for Christie. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. And then we have secretary. Anybody would like to keep notes?
I
It's
nominate
not too
Amy
hard
Brooker.
to do it.
Okay.
She's so good at
We
it.
have one nomination for Amy. Any other
She's
nominations?
so good at it.
Anybody else like to write?
Anybody else like to? I'm all
Take
for it.
creative notes?
Anybody else?
Amy does
I
an
would love,
awesome
I would
job.
love for somebody to take it.
Yeah. Any second to that motion? All right, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Amy, for being so agreeable. All right, and then treasurer. Our treasurer is not
Can we
here
nominate Kathy when
By
she's not
acclamation.
here?
by acclamation.
By
Yeah.
acclamation?
Okay, everybody okay with that? We'll
Yeah.
nominate Kathy by acclamation? All right.
Yes.
I think she'd be happy
She
with
just
that.
started and she's got the
She
hang
said
of it
she's
now.
got her
She's-
feet
yeah.
on the ground
She
now.
needs another year.
Yeah, yeah.
She's good at it.
Okay. The Arkansas Republican Party District 3, the 3rd District Committee meeting is coming up. Anyone can go to that. It's going to be in Springdale, which is much closer than normal. It's going to be on October 9th. It'll cost $10, and we can get a carpool, a carload going. I'm going, Helen is going,
I'm going.
you're going.
It's at the Springdale Country
I'll
Club, isn't
probably
it?
go.
Yes, it's a country club.
It'll be
Uh-huh.
nice.
Can we all ride with you?
Sure, I mean, maybe we'll have more than one car.
But we might have more than one car, yeah,
It's
so.
kind of fun to go.
If anyone else wants to go, let me know, and, we need to get the names in really soon. Okay. All right, and then the October meeting is going to be at a different day. It's gonna be the 4th Monday, remember? It's gonna be a big deal. Please, advertise it. We're going to get posters posted around. We're going to advertise it at the Benton County Committee meeting next week. So if anyone's going to the Benton County Republican Women's meeting tomorrow, that would be a great place to take some flyers and invite them. All right, so is there any other business that I've forgotten? I want all of you to go shop, so I don't want to take too much more time. Yeah. Did I forget anything?
You
All
might
right.
tell when the tea is. Our tea is,
Yes. Our tea is on Saturday, November 13th. It will be at Kathy Coleman's home in the afternoon, about 2 to 4, basically. Yeah. So, all right. If there is no other business, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
I
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.